I'm excited to be with you here today for our program on performance reviews from a manager's perspective. These monthly free virtual events are sponsored by Careers Advance. My name is Lisa Panarello. I'm the founder and head of Careers Advance, and I will be your host. Today's topic is quite timely, I think, as performance review season is here. And this will probably be one of the most unique performance review periods ever, particularly for the manager's side of the desk. Leaders are faced with the pains of executing staff appraisals in a normal year, the time that it takes, the pile of paperwork that it generates, the unpredictable employee behavior, etc., on top of all of managers' other work priorities. Compounding these regular challenges, leaders are faced with assessing staff that may have been working from home or furloughed for months due to COVID-19. Now, I feel managers' pain, and that's why I wanted to have this conversation. And I'm not going to pretend that we'll have all the answers, but I do believe that you will hear insights and tactics today that will help you get through review season unscathed and drive assessments where everyone wins. Now, that said, our program is being recorded today. So if you're on my distribution list, you will receive it next week as a reference. And if you're not, email me and I'll add you to the list. And you can also see past recorded programs on the Careers Advance YouTube channel and website. Okay, let's meet our panelists. First up, Michelle Brown. Michelle brings to the table 25 years of corporate leadership experience from firms including M&M Mars, the National Basketball Association, and Everlast. Leveraging her success and expertise, in 2005, she founded Into Action Coaching, and she partners with business owners, executives, and emerging leaders in achieving outstanding results across various industries, including telecom, finance, legal, biotech, manufacturing, and nonprofit. Now, as a certified executive, career, and business coach, certified behavioral and values analyst, and graduate at the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program, Michelle helps clients design and implement new approaches to resolve on-the-job challenges around communication, team dynamics, change leadership, cultural transformation, and beyond. Super excited to have Michelle here with us today. Next up, Ted Gerber. Ted is the president of Addison Resources Group, is an executive coach and organizational development consultant with over 25 years of diverse industry experience. He's coached C-suite executives and teams at Fortune 100 companies, as well as small and mid-sized firms across the US, Canada, Europe, Latin America, and Africa. His particular specialties are conflict management, negotiations, influencing, and facilitation skills. And Ted holds a master's degree in industrial relations from the University of Illinois, and he's been a frequent guest lecturer and instructor at colleges and universities such as NYU, Fairleigh Dickinson, and Cornell. And last but not least, Carol. Carol Hess is the founder and CEO of Chess Executive Insights, a firm specializing in business and management consulting, executive coaching, and public speaking training. Her expertise comes off the heels of a 3-decade tenure at Hewlett-Packard, where she held numerous vice president positions and responsibility for a $23 billion P&L. Over her career, Carol built and led teams in areas such as product management, R&D, supply chain, marketing, and governance, working across the US, Europe, China, and India. Carol holds an MBA in marketing and management information systems from Vanderbilt University and a bachelor's degree in general business from Michigan State. Once again, we have a wealth of knowledge at our fingertips. Now, while we dive into some key questions that I want to ask, if a comment or a question of yours comes to mind, drop it in the chat box. We'll absolutely get to it. All right. Okay, my first question is around the review process. I've read that 66% of employees reported they were strongly dissatisfied with their company's employee evaluation process. 25% of them said assessments don't even help them. Now, I read an article recently that revealed firms like Deloitte, Adobe, Gap, and GE share similar perspectives about annual reviews, that they waste time, they restrict creativity, and even reduce collaboration. Maybe it's time to rethink things. So I'm going to start with you, Michelle. From your experience, what constitutes an effective performance review process?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can understand why some organizations don't see it as a necessity. However, with the work that we do in talent development, the advice I want to give to managers is that the evaluation process is an iterative process. It isn't something that should only be focused on twice during a year, at a midpoint and an endpoint. As an iterative process, it really should be a essential sort of communication between manager and direct report on an ongoing basis. So even within the formal process, where at the beginning of the evaluation period, ultimately goals should be identified by the direct report with approval and review by the manager, so that throughout the performance evaluation process, they understand what it is that they're going to be evaluated on. And beyond that, making sure that there are specific, using the sort of SMART acronym, specific, measurable, attainable, reasonable, and time sensitive. The goals should be crafted in that way. And ongoingly, even with the one-on-one, either weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly meetings that managers are having with their direct reports, there should be some touch points, not just project status updates, but how are you doing with regard to the performance goals that you've outlined, is what question and inquiry a manager should have. So again, it's part of the employee development process. It's not a gotcha. It's not, let me wait till the end of the year and then think of what you've done in the course of the last, 3 weeks or 3 months, and that's what your evaluation is going to be based on. It should be throughout the entire year.
That one word takeaway for me is iterative, to really make it ongoing, so it's not just a surprise at the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So I appreciate that perspective. Carol, can you add your thoughts on how managers can develop, or at least champion the development of an effective review process at their organization?
Right. So I totally agree with everything Michelle said. Ongoing reviews, nothing should be a surprise. They should really know their objectives and their goals up front, and they should be discussing those on a regular basis. And I also like what you said, Michelle, about there is a formal mid-year, there is a formal end of the year, but again, ongoing throughout. I think the piece I would add to that is to make it a very well-rounded, effective performance review. I would recommend that they get feedback from others in the organization. So reach out to that person's peers. Make sure you get some feedback from them on how they're working, because you'll get a different perspective than what you see from the manager-employee relationship. And I would also say reach out to their subordinates as well. How are they taking care of them as a manager? Are there things they need to improve? So I think getting feedback from those other groups will help give a more well-rounded review. I also think it's great to reach out to the employee themselves and say, do a little bit of a self-evaluation so we can get to see if we're on the same page, right? So before the review, tell me again what you think your accomplishments were, your strengths, your areas to work on. And it flows to me into the next part of it, which is I do think it needs to have a little bit of structure to it. So the structure that I like to use is, first of all, what were all your accomplishments over the year, right? What were your successes and the things you did you're really proud of? And then what are your strengths? What were the things that you really excelled in that helped you with these accomplishments? And then, of course, where are your opportunities for growth and improvement? And I think if you ask those peers and subordinates that, if you ask the employee to do that self-evaluation, and then you do that as well, you can structure it in a very cohesive way to give that feedback.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of structure. I appreciate that perspective. And additionally, that one thing that you said about the opportunities for growth and development, I think that's a piece that's sometimes missing. A lot of employees feel like, oh, there's nothing about the future in this assessment. So really kind of tackling where do I want to go next, and really thinking about what the career-wise, skill development, et cetera. So having that sort of future focus.
Yep.
Well, with your suggestion about bringing in peers and subordinates as part of the review process and getting that information from them kind of leads right into my next question about objectivity versus subjectivity. You know, many assessments require some sort of scoring. And when metrics are involved, it's fairly simple. You either hit your sales target or your call quota or not. You either launch the program on budget or not. You were late 5 times a month and so forth. But there are many cases where interpretation is necessary, say for evaluating an employee's professionalism, their teamwork, or their customer service skills. That's kind of a little trickier. And it's almost a bit of a tug of war. So Ted, can you start us off with the document side of this equation? When a leader is writing an assessment, describing their evaluation on paper, how can a manager balance objectivity with subjectivity, particularly in a year where many folks have experienced some disruptive work situations?
I would just, before I comment on that, I just want to make one other comment on the last segment.
Sure.
Which is I've seen too many managers utilize the mentality of a checklist. You know, so when they do a performance review, it's check, check, check. And what's missing is there's not enough dialogue, to the point that was raised about asking the questions. So I think a manager has to be good at asking the right kinds of questions to draw out from others, peers, as well as the staff member, their perception, again, of accomplishment, strengths, and where they want to go in the future. But I run into this a lot where people say, well, you can't measure certain things. And to your point, sales results or meeting certain objectives that are quantifiable, very easy. On the qualitative ones, teamwork, let's take that for example. What I always say to a manager is, how do you know if somebody's providing good teamwork or being a good team player? What are you seeing them do? And I think the manager has to think about that. For example, is that particular staff member in team meetings interrupting others? Do they come prepared? Do they work interdependently with others on the team in addressing projects? Are they providing, or are they living up to commitments they make to other team members, for example? So those are the kinds of things that might be indicative of providing good teamwork. And as a manager, I've got to be able to have examples of where that was being applied or not being applied. So when I have that conversation and I say, I think you need to improve in regards to teamwork, the reaction of the staff member may be, well, what do you mean? I think I'm a great team player. You've got to be able to say, well, here's where I have seen things where it is not, in my perception, where it needs to be. So I think that preparation is really essential, and make sure it's not a checklist, it's a dialogue. And I've come out with an outcome that addresses the issue in a way that are some concrete actions, as was mentioned before.
Great, I appreciate that. Michelle, can you add your thoughts? You know, it's funny, that whole document is, to me, very cumbersome to go through from both sides of the table, but managers do have to write. They have to share their opinions on paper. So how would you suggest to add on to Ted's thoughts about being objective and subjective where you need to be?
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly with Ted's comments. There is an element of subjectivity that naturally is going to go into an evaluation. It's sort of a perception, you know, that's matched with the actual metrics or measurement. So there's no way of getting around it. However, you know, I remember when I was a manager, and certainly, you know, in my position as a coach, in the way that I coach managers to go through this process, it's really imperative that once a direct report has crafted their goals or objectives, again, you know, should be a collaborative process. It's really important that I think you start with the end in mind. So using Ted's example of, you know, a team player. So as a manager, ask the subordinate, well, what will that look like? If ultimately, it's almost like when we were in school and the teacher said, you know, everybody's going to start with a 100% or an A, and it's up to you to keep it. As a manager, you can say, look, if the ultimate score is, you know, far exceeds expectations, then what would that look like? So that you are actually helping the manager at that point identify what are the behaviors, what are the actions that they have to exhibit in order to earn that far exceeds expectations. And this way it gets granular in terms of what they then will be present to in order to, in the example of, you know, team effectiveness, show up on time, you know, demonstrate collaboration, whatever the answer is to that, that ultimately should be the baseline. And again, with whatever observations the manager is having in seeing the behavior of that manager. And I really loved Carol's add-on in terms of supplemental support. That will help to determine how far or how close they are to matching that far exceeds expectations. But at least it gives them a goal in mind, because they then know what success will look like at the end.
Wow, yeah, so important. What does success look like to you on both sides? I think defining that up front. You read these performance review documents and the questions are sometimes confusing and they overlap. And what I think of teamwork may be different from what you think of teamwork. So setting up those definitions and those of the terms that you're looking for and the behaviors that you want, and having those expectations up front can really help balance that objectivity work versus subjectivity. So great stuff. I want to remind everyone on this call, all that we're talking about obviously is it's actually subjective because we're giving our own opinion here, but we want to bring in your voice. If one of the things that we talk about or our panelists is sharing relates to maybe something's going on with your team, throw in a question to the chat so we can make this specific to your pain point and what you're going through for your managerial process. All right, great. So, just on a side, I read one tip recently about the whole evaluation. Instead of using social evaluations where you compare a person or a group to another person or a group, to use what I call, and I didn't even know that they use this phrase, temporal evaluations, where you compare a person's performance at one time to their own performance at another time. So you're not necessarily saying, oh, you should be more like him or her, because that's not necessarily the kind of evaluation that's really going to help an employee shine, right?
Carol, or excuse me, Lisa, I
Yeah.
wanted one other thing that came up yesterday. I was coaching somebody where they had just gone through a performance evaluation with their manager. What was interesting is he's a very technical person, excellent technically. And his manager said to him, look, one of your challenges, as I see it going forward, is to be able to translate the technical for the non-technical person in a way that makes it simple, clear, and understandable. And that's something he struggles with. And it was interesting, the manager said, and the reason that's important is not only for you in communicating with others, but for me in terms of being your advocate within the organization for future promotions. And I thought that was an interesting take, that the manager giving the performance review is also an advocate for the person receiving it. And to be able to be that advocate, the more those changes occur that are outlined, the stronger that advocacy is going to be. So it was just an interesting take, I thought.
Yeah, that leads us right into the next question, actually, around giving the verbal feedback. It's hard to say you're not doing a good job. I don't think any manager really likes saying those words. But as a manager, you want to be sensitive to the employee's feelings, but you want to get your point across that some sort of change is needed in either behavior or productivity, etc. So what are some of the best practices for delivering negative feedback that doesn't necessarily tarnish the employee-employer relationship and still can motivate the staff to actually work harder and improve? So I want to start with you, Carol. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really tough one, and it has to be done the right way. So for me, and I've had to deliver these a few times, I would say, first I do try to talk about some of the strengths the employee has, and then I will go into the areas of development. There is a technique out there where some people like to sandwich it, say some good positive things, say some things they need to work on, and then close again with some positive things. I've heard conflicting feedback on that. And my strategy is really, I want them to walk away feeling good and empowered and powerful about what we've discussed, but that doesn't mean you sandwich the good and the bad. And so it's a delicate balance you need to have. So I do start with the strengths, but then when I get to the areas of development, first of all, you have got to be open and honest. You can't beat around the bush. You have to be very clear. And for those, I see some familiar faces on the call. For those who know me, I am very direct, and my style is a little more direct. But you do have to be careful when you're delivering that negative feedback, how direct you are. You have to watch your tone of voice, make sure you're delivering it in the right way. And I think maybe it was Michelle or someone already spoke about this, but you have to have concrete examples. Here's the situation, here's what happened, here's the results of that. You know, maybe even here's how other people were impacted by that and why that's not the way we need to be doing things, or why it's an area we need to work on improving. So those concrete examples are super important to help them understand. And it goes back to, as somebody else said, you know, setting the right expectation. What does success look like? So you need those examples to have that conversation. Of course, you've got to be very, I don't know the right word, humane is the only word that comes to mind, but you've got to be very sensitive to their feelings and their input. And you need to give them time to react. So tell them what this situation is they need to work on. Give them time to react. And then start working on, here's the suggestions of how you can learn a certain skill you don't have, or develop a technique or a way of addressing it. I think asking them to give feedback as well. How do you think we could fix this? What do you think success would look like as well, is very important. You definitely want to make sure you define what success looks like and have those metrics and measures. Of course, then you go back and do that regular check-ins. How are we doing on that one skill we were working on improving? You know, it's really a challenge. One thing I've told many people before is feedback is a gift, right? People can choose to accept that gift, or people can choose to deny that gift. So you've got to work through, how are they accepting this feedback and what are their emotions and how do you resolve it? You don't get defensive, don't get into a back and forth, you know, argument or discussion with them, but just go back to sharing the facts. And one last thing is, if they start to be a little argumentative about the feedback you're giving them, the examples, they ask, who said that? You know, why did somebody make that comment? You absolutely can never divulge where the feedback came from, right? Do not, you know, get into a trap and say, well, it's not really me, Joe said it, or whatever. You've got to own it, and you've got to keep that feedback confidential that people shared with you. So, so a lot of different examples, but those are some of the ideas of how you deliver that negative feedback.
Sounds like a reporter. You got to protect your source, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. And I do love the specific examples. You need something to refer to. I mean, even in my personal life, if I want to get some feedback from my husband, my brother, well, can you give me an example of when I said that or did that and how it made you feel? Because I don't have a reference point. Ted.
Yes.
You coach a lot of leaders as well as Michelle and Carol. So what are your suggestions for how to provide that negative feedback that's going to not land so hard on the employee, but really help them think differently and want to do better?
I see two aspects of it. First, the manager, I think, needs to approach it from I want to help you mindset, not I'm going to get you mindset kind of thing. And secondly, what I've done when I've given people, let's say, a 360 feedback, which I know they're not going to be maybe happy with, is I ask them to sort of think about it if that the company sent them to the Harvard Business School for 2 weeks on a program on how to develop talent. And as part of that program, they got a case study. And this case study was their 360 feedback. So divorce yourself from this is you. This is somebody that's a case study you're looking at. What would you recommend to this person in terms of processing the feedback and actions they could take to address the feedback? And sometimes that mind shift helps them process what they see as negative feedback. Because ultimately, people many times don't want to hear, we all want to hear we're doing great things. And sometimes when we hear we're not, our initial reaction is to be defensive, or I like to say the justification. Yes, but you don't understand. And I try to get them to think about, it's got to approach it from a yes and. How do I build on what people are saying versus saying, I disagree? And ultimately, to me, the most successful outcome of a performance review is, are they really committed to make the changes required? And that's really a litmus test for coaching as well, because if you don't have a committed client, so to speak, it's very difficult to change, no matter who the coach is. So do you sense that commitment at the end of the process? And if you don't sense it, I think Carol said this, you've got to be honest with them to say, I'm not sensing you're really committed to make the changes you said you're going to make for whatever reason. Because if people will say, yes, boss, yes, boss, yes, boss, and then many times what I have seen, the same issues are back next year on the performance review, the same exact ones. was that change has not occurred. Now, why is that happening? Because maybe the commitment wasn't really there to make the changes. And that's where, if you get the real commitment, the manager can help in terms of their coaching to help that person change whatever behaviors are required to show the outcome in a positive way.
Mm.
And I have a 3H thing I like to call. I say, to go into a performance review, homework, got to do your homework. We've talked about that, examples. Honesty, got to be honest, candid, and help, offering help, in terms of not only the mindset that you have at the beginning, but throughout the process.
I add to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, sometimes even the term negative feedback can lead someone to have trepidation around receiving it. So, what I like to see within organizations is that it's served up as constructive feedback, right? Because feedback is a gift. I wholeheartedly believe that. And the more that is reinforced, you may have a direct report who's just really sensitive to it. I mean, it's hard sometimes to, receive constructive feedback, because we all like to think that, we're perfect, but ultimately it is a gift. So, reframing the term from negative feedback to constructive feedback just lands a bit softer. The other thing, and again, my colleagues kind of sort of made mention to it, is it goes to Don Miguel Ruiz 4 agreements. Feedback, don't take it personally. And what I mean by that is, yes, it is speaking to your behavior, but your behavior is something that you have control over. So I think when a direct report sort of takes offense to whatever the feedback may be, it could possibly be because they feel like, well, I'm not a good person, or yes, it's let's really just look at the behavior, which you then have control over changing, and hopefully it won't impede their self-esteem or their confidence, because you want to, as a supportive, empowering manager, maintain that commitment to them, that you are committed to their success and want them to improve, so that, again, they become a real value to the organization. And then lastly, I love what Ted made reference to in terms of the dialogue. We call it the coach approach. The more a manager in this process asks inquiring questions, even as it relates to commitment, it may not be, I want you to be committed. It's, how committed are you to making these changes? When we ask the open-ended question, how committed, we are then looking for them to tell us as the manager, well, they could, not be 100% honest, but you want to get from them, yes, I'm committed to it. And that's then what you're holding them accountable to, because you're not telling them, you are asking them, how committed are you to this process of making the improvements? And then subsequently, if there's, if they fall short of it, it's, okay, we had this conversation, you committed to it. And that just leaves room for, okay, let's talk about where the breakdown may have occurred. So yeah, that's all I wanted to kind of add to that.
Could I just add to that, Michelle, because I agree with you 100%. I think it's also incumbent upon the manager to say, here's how I will be able to tell you're really committed when I see the following. And the other thing you mentioned, which I would agree with, is the use of language. Because I worked for an organization once, they didn't call it a performance review. They didn't call it an evaluation session. It was called an evolution session, which was kind of interesting. To take out that connotation of, it's negative feedback. It's about evolving to a better leadership position or role, if you will, by doing certain things that need to be done. So I think language, to your point, is very important in how you frame it.
Oh, I got exactly out of that question what I was hoping for. I purposely called it negative feedback because I wanted to hear the language that you would choose. And it is that one word can make a difference, constructive. And you want to build on the strengths, not necessarily just tear down the weaknesses. So I appreciate that. And to your thread, Michelle, about how they identify, like a lot of folks do identify with the feedback they receive. So if it's given to them in a negative fashion and it seems like a downplay, they'll think of themselves as bad person, bad employee. When you are more constructive, they can identify with, let's separate the personal, let's work on the business aspect. So Good perspective.
But I just add one other point, which is an interesting question, and I don't have the answer, but somebody once asked me, what is the difference between manipulation and motivation? So if you think about the manager giving the performance review, are you really committed to create motivation in that staff member versus I'm manipulating them to an outcome that I would like to see? And it's just a question more than anything.
And I love that. Oh, this stuff is so juicy, right? Because we keep feeding off of one another. Going back to my initial comment about it being an iterative process, right? That means, and I love the aspect of motivation. It's when you see the associate making improvements, speak to that. You know, if they have been in a meeting and perhaps, you know, what constructive feedback they got is that they have poor facilitation skills, you know, they aren't running the meeting appropriately. And that is what the developmental objective is. So when you see that they are garnering the skills that keep the agenda on point, they're making sure that the participants in the meeting are all contributing and that not one extroverted, outgoing person is, you know, taking up all the room, comment and say, you know what, Rebecca, that was a great meeting that you led. And then speak to specific things that they did, because that is what you're asking them and inviting them to continue to repeat. So that's why it's so important that, you know, these things not be left to the mid-year and the end point, that not only are you calling out what constructive feedback or what improvement they should be making, but what should be underscored is when they are hitting the mark, because then they're saying, okay, now I need to do more of that, but they know what that looks like.
Yeah, I guess I would just add to that, it's giving them the feedback in the moment, right? And you used a very positive example, but it can be on when they didn't exhibit it as well. But I think giving the feedback at the moment really brings it to light for people, and they can say, oh, she's right. I was thinking something else or whatever, versus giving it later. So positive or, constructive, the moment helps a lot.
Right. And in the moment, just in private. So in terms of being a public bashing, just you're right.
Yes.
Well, that all leads into the next question. Really perfect timing on that is the PIP, the Performance Improvement Plan. A Forbes article noted that many employees feel that performance improvement plans do more harm than good, that they're used just to buy time before making a personnel change or to create a paper trail for legal purposes. Michelle, I'm coming to you. Should we ditch the PIP, or can managers really design a corrective action plan that works?
Yeah. PIPs are interesting. I'll phrase it that way. And I do believe to some extent it is a basic warning to an associate that their behavior or their development needs to be improved. And specifically, it should be time sensitive. Usually it's, 3 months to allow that person, given what the objectives are or the improvements that they need to make. But it's daunting usually, because at the time that a PIP is used, it's everything else perhaps has not worked successfully. And this is the opportunity for the associate to really kind of, use best efforts to kind of overhaul and make some improvements. So yeah, I think it's essential. I think, again, even for legal purposes, HR, advocates for making sure that they have proven that they have done everything that they could to support that associate in making the improvements that they need so that, they can stay gainfully employed. But yeah, that's kind of what I have to say about it.
Well, it's not a first reach tool. You should have done something else as a manager. So yeah, no, I appreciate that. Carol, what are your thoughts on the PIP?
Yeah, so I think it depends what your objective is. So if your objective is to move a person on out of the organization, then yes, a PIP can work, and it gives you the paper trail and it covers you from a legal perspective, and you have all those pieces that you need. But if your objective is really to turn the person around, to change the behavior, to help them grow and improve, you really should have done that anyway, and it should have barely been done outside of the PIP. Before you even got to that, you should have had all of these ongoing discussions with them. So you should have followed the steps we talked about of having consistent reviews, mid-year, year-end, ongoing. So you shouldn't have to use the PIP when you're trying to help turn them around. I guess the other thing I would say is, when you get to the stage of doing a performance improvement plan, people already know, right? When you're getting ready to sit down and have that conversation, you've had multiple conversations, they know what's coming, and all it's doing is being maybe a formality of what you're trying to get across. So in the end, I think about how you want to have a win-win situation with the employee. And I'll just tell you a story or a couple of stories in that I have had to do a lot of workforce reductions, right? I've had to move people on in organizations before for various reasons, including performance. And one thing I have found consistently with all of the people that we've moved on from a performance perspective, in the end, it's always turned out to be better for that person. What I mean by that is, they knew they weren't happy, they knew they weren't in the right job, they knew they weren't performing the way they needed to be, and they knew they needed a change. And what they really needed was this manager to help boost them along to make that change. And I come from a large company, right, HP, and so there are so many other jobs within our company. It was easy for us to have a discussion about, you don't have these skills. Maybe you're placed in the wrong area. You do have these skills, and let's move you to a role where you can be successful. And I'm not saying move a problem, so I want to be really careful about that, right? But you're helping them address where they can use the skills that they have. And then, of course, if they can't, it's about leaving the company overall and finding something different. But I think it's important to know that these people are pretty aware that they're not performing the way they need to be. And when they do find that role that gives them passion and excitement, and they can really contribute in a way, they do feel so much better about themselves. So I do think we need to keep that in mind. We are thinking about them, sort of taking care of them and helping them move in the right direction for them.
Great. I got a couple of questions from our audience here. And this is, I guess, timely too, because everything's on social media. So Susan asks, do managers look at social media posts, what you write, whether it's on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Yelp, whatever pages that you're on, specifically if they're not anonymous, do they look at that and take it into consideration for your performance review? Anyone have a comment on that?
So I would say, I was looking at Susan's comment there. I think hers is specific to the whole company versus a specific person, right? So I do think companies are very aware of what's being written in social media, and they love feedback, right? A good company loves feedback and wants to hear what are employees saying and how do we need to change, which I think is a little bit separate from, Joe was the guy at Starbucks who didn't do something, and I see that and I'll provide Joe feedback. So it seems a little bit more generic, but I do think any type of feedback we get, we need to address.
Got it. Another question we have here specifically about the review. Many companies require managers to assign a rating according to a bell curve. How do you explain to a exceeds employee why they are met expectations and yet still keep them motivated? Ted, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's interesting because, what does that employee think they exceeded? Or did the manager think they exceeded expectations? That's important in the discussion, because, the manager may say met and the employee feels exceeds, then you have a difference of opinion as to what was accomplished. So I think there needs to be consistency between the two. If the manager feels exceeds, then why aren't they rating that person as exceeds? You know, I understand the bell curve and all that, but to me, it's like, again, it comes back to the honesty. I mean, if somebody is that good, you run the risk, if you don't give them that kind of evaluation, that they'll try to exit out or find another opportunity. So to me, it's.
Yeah, you know what's interesting? I remember when I was in corporate, the whole evaluation process, and you know, it's just inherent with flaws inherently, right? So a manager can do the best they can in helping to define and working with the direct report what SMART goals will equal, far exceeds, or meets expectations. That's why I wholeheartedly believe it is so important when objectives and goals are formulated at the onset that they be as measurable, because what cannot be measured cannot be managed. And, you know, so as best it can is always going to be some level of subjectivity. But anyway, however, sometimes maybe the larger the organization, the evaluation and the outcome is not just dependent on what the manager believes, even with supplemental input that Carol made reference to, but oftentimes the manager is going into what they call a forced distribution process, where there are other VPs or department heads, because the organization has a finite level of funds that they have to then divvy given what meritorious increases and bonuses. So there's only a certain percentage of far exceeds, only a certain percentage of meets expectations. And it just becomes, you know, a battleground where a manager has to go in and fight or influence, let's say, why, you know, their associates, based on the outcome of their performance, should get far exceeds, when in fact, you know, there already may be X amount of associates that are, you know, in that ratio. So it's a tricky thing, and this is where the whole performance evaluation process gets a little murky, because it's not just it's not only the manager who can determine, you know, what the final outcome is. A lot of organizations have those panels that, you know, make it a bit more challenging.
I would add to it as well that I've been in organizations where we have used the forced distribution and we've not. And the forced distribution can start to drive bad behavior as well. If people know they're competing with their peers to be seen as the one who exceeds, that can drive behavior that doesn't really drive teamwork in the organization. So I know a few companies that I've been involved with have absolutely moved away from the forced distribution and not putting people in that position to drive the right behavior.
Great. And Kathy, I do see your comments, and I'm going to touch on them in a minute. And Michelle, you brought up the word finance, so it kind of leads me to my next question here. Rewarding performance. I mean, if an employee did great work throughout the year or came out of a pip with flying colors, a manager may want to reward them for those past contributions and incentivize them for future performance. This year, particularly with all the business loss, the hiring freezes, the extra costs associated with the pandemic, managers just may have very small merit pay budgets, leaving them with little room for salary increases and bonuses. So, Carol, what non-financial ideas would you give our managers on this call for compensating and recognizing great talent?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And this year in particular, there is going to be a challenge with funds. So a couple of things come to mind for me. The first one that I think is quite obvious is just recognition. People love recognition. It never gets old being told you did a good job. And to be honest, we all get busy at work and we forget to do that. So Michelle's example of catching them in the moment when they did a great job, giving that kind of recognition is really important. Now, you sort of mentioned it, Lisa, a little bit. You've got to think through and you've got to understand for each employee, is it public recognition they want or is it private recognition they want? Because different people really are motivated in different ways. And some people want the big headlights and call it out in an all-employee meeting and call it out in a staff meeting that Joe did this great job and what he did. And then there's other people that say, you know what, I did a great job in a one-on-one quietly with you, and I don't need the big headlights. So you do need to understand and think about that. You can also do recognition by, printing out a certificate, making an employee of the month, right? You can do some things like that. The other thing you can do is what I call give them a seat at the table. And so what I mean by that is have them attend a more senior level meeting. Have them be involved in strategy setting or hearing the discussion that the managers at the next level up are having and being able to contribute. And sometimes that even leads to maybe giving them a special project or something that gives them that visibility. Now you have to be careful because an employee can say, well, I'm a great employee and I'm really busy and you gave me a special project with more work, right? So you've got to balance that correctly. But if you give them a project that gives them visibility to those senior executives, that's really going to give them some motivation and can help them in their career overall. And then one other thing I would look at is sometimes if it's a really good employee, you can think about doing something out of your own pocket. Send them a gift card. Of course, you can send them a handwritten card as well. People love recognition of mail them a snail mail card. But if you do want to take something out of your pocket, buy them a small gift card, send them some flowers, a bottle of wine, something like that. And then the last thing I would suggest is if you do have the ability to rework compensation plans, it's not something that you can do immediately, but like right now, I think Michelle or Ted talked about how we get yearly bonuses and we work through how do we share those yearly bonuses. Maybe you can influence the organization to say, guess what? We should start doing quarterly bonuses because we might do really poorly one quarter and better another quarter and we could reward them. So it's an example, but the idea is go back and look at the compensation plan and see if there's a way that that can be adjusted in some way. So there's a couple of things you can do outside of just paying money.
Yeah, it's a lot of little ideas. Little things go a long way, they say, and I like honed in really on your understand your direct report or the folks that you are managing, because everyone does get motivated differently. So we talk about fairness, but you don't have to give everyone the same aha moment because to your point, they might not receive it the same way. So really knowing your employee can help. So Ted, can you take us the other thing that reminded me of is when you reward that behavior in a public way, the other side benefit is people see what you think success looks like. And, oh, Joe got rewarded for this. I better start doing that kind of behavior. So it helps the organization rise in their skills as well. Right. Great. Ted, can you take us a little further here? When let's say a promotional opportunity isn't available, what other ways can a manager sort of intrinsically reward performance?
Well, I think a lot of this has been mentioned, but one thing I wanted to add to that is that when you think about recognition, many times we give recognition to an employee based on what we think they need to get recognition on. The opportunity, you said it about really directly knowing our employees. The more we know our employees, maybe there are things that we never give recognition to them about that are really important to them and they would really love to get recognition about it. And I'll use myself as an example. When I facilitate meetings, when I write on a flip chart or a whiteboard, that is not my greatest strength. And I always try to work to get better at it. And people sometimes at the end of the meeting will say, it was great facilitation. You involved the audience, you did this, you did that, which is generally what I might hear. But if somebody came up to me at the end of that meeting and said, you know what, I really appreciated the fact that your writing on the flip chart was great, that might mean more to me in a way because I never hear that. So the opportunity for the manager to really understand the employee and understand what really they want to hear recognition for is really important, and you can utilize that in a time where you can't provide any kind of economic incentive, if you will. So I just wanted to make that point. It really does open up other possibilities for recognition. In terms of promotability, there's no easy answer here. The only thing to me would be conditioning or positioning yourself for a future promotion if and when the financial situation becomes better. So the recognition The special projects that were mentioned, for example, working on a special project, attending a strategy meeting, all this is about building your career portfolio, if you will. So if and when the promotion opportunity occurs, you're well positioned to maybe be considered for that. So to me, that's the sort of the carrot that you hold out. Because I think you got to, again, to come back to the idea of being on my 3 H's there, honesty. You got to be honest. You know, there's no immediate promotion. It's more a long-term game versus a short-term game.
Sounds like managers have to get creative.
Yeah, I think what it's important for managers to convey is that there's still an investment that they are willing to give to the employee. And it may not come in terms of increased bonus or even a bonus, depending upon what the company's financial health is, or, you know, may not be the maximum meritorious increase. So monetarily, and I wholeheartily agree with the suggestions that Carol made reference to, you know, a stretch project, acting as a proxy for a boss to, you know, have the associate attend, you know, a strategic meeting or just gain exposure. The other thing too is, if an organization has an employee resource group, nominate that person to be part of, you know, an employee resource group. In addition to, again, may or may not, they may not have a formal mentoring program, but even if there is no formal mentoring program, invite the associate to identify someone within the organization that can actually be their mentor or their sponsor. So this is how an organization or our manager can say, we're invested in you. We're investing in your development because we want to retain you. You are a value to our organization. And subsequently, there's just a myriad of ways in which that can be demonstrated.
Oh, great ideas. And even Susan threw a little comment there. Sometimes it could be a simple email. Thank you, and recognizing you for your contributions. And I also read like third-party praise can help too. We tell someone else, hey, tell Mike or Jane they did a great job, and I hear from someone else. That can also be a unique way. So great ways for rewarding performance. And we're coming up, wow, 8 minutes on the hour. I just got my last question here, and it's a two-pronged one. Research has shown that if you don't promote often enough, employees start to look outside the company. Conversely, moving someone along too soon can lead to ineffective performance in a new role or even mismanagement of others underneath them. Is it better to take swift action? Are there costs in delaying the decision? Who should I consult as a manager? It seems that there are a lot of factors at play when considering promoting or terminating. So, Ted, how do you go from having an inkling you want to promote or fire an employee to knowing for certain?
Well, I think the preparation for the performance review, we talked about looking at one's performance and what they are objectives they're meeting or not meeting, and the behaviors they're demonstrating or not demonstrating is an important preparation for that. And if you make the assessment, for example, and this is where, if you make the assessment, the person, I like to say is the person salvageable if they're not performing, for example? And what I mean by that is, can they be trained? Can they be coached? Can they learn new skills that can make them reach the level of performance they have to reach and the behaviors they have to demonstrate? If you cross the threshold and say yes, then obviously you have those tools that you can utilize, the coaching, training, etc. If you make the determination no, and I've been burned myself as individually once as a manager, where I felt the person was salvageable, but I knew deep down he wasn't. Okay. And I kept him on, and it was a disaster for him, but for me also. Because there were questions then raised about my leadership. Why didn't you make the call earlier and exit this person from the organization? They were not performing, nor would they ever perform. So it's a tough decision, and nobody wants to be hard-nosed about it, but you've got to make the determination to say and have an honest discussion with yourself. Are they salvageable or not? Can they improve? Then I can offer help. If they can't, then maybe, to the point made earlier, maybe the job isn't for them. Another job in the organization might be better suited for them. It's like the baseball player that goes to another team was terrible, now hits 300. So either exit them to another position out of the company or provide some other opportunities for them that they don't see yet, versus keeping them on and running the risk that your leadership is going to be questioned because you're not making, and I've seen this on coach people where they get feedback around this, they're not willing to make the tough call.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Ted, I think that when you add in, other people know that person isn't performing as well. And when you take action on it, they're so happy. You know, you hear feedback later, I'm so glad you did X, Y, Z and helped this problem. We needed it, and thank you for taking that. So the employees notice it.
Right, exactly.
Great. Michelle, can you help tackle the second part of this question? What can a manager do to increase the perception of fairness across their team when they're handling promotions and terminations? You know, this is all very sensitive up and down, so I'm curious for your thoughts on the fairness perspective.
Yeah, well, I just want to go back. There's a phrase about the hiring and termination. It's slow hire, fast fire, right? So managers need to really be meticulous about the process of when they're making a selection. But if the associate is just not up to par, you know, making a quick decision is important. So your question, Lisa, is about fairness when promotability is not a possibility, or?
Well, either way, promotion or termination, you know, you've got a team. You could have 10, 20, 50 people reporting to you, and you're promoting one person, terminating another, and then someone else in the group may say, well, why didn't I get that promotion? And why isn't she or he terminated? Why was it me? So how do you make sure there's a fairness of thread behind your decisions?
Well, yeah, I mean, it all boils down to what is the promotion, and with the criteria of what are the requirements for a person being eligible for that promotion. It boils down to the process should be sort of fair and equitable, that within your department, you're looking at the capabilities and the achievements across the board, and whoever demonstrates sort of the being best suited for that promotion, that is what should be communicated. And you know, it's looking to have the conversation with whoever on the team felt that it was, you know, they were unfairly passed over. It's to illustrate as best you can why another associate was better qualified based on their achievements and their skill set, et cetera. I mean, so that can be disclosed. And also with that associate who may feel that they were unfairly passed over, it's okay, let's talk about what, you know, developmental areas, what things that you need to attain in order to potentially be ready for a promotion. Not guaranteeing anything, but, you know, we find, and this is where unfortunately millennials get a negative reputation, because oftentimes they are very motivated by accelerated advancement. And after 3, 6, 8, 10 months, they feel like, okay, I'm ready for a promotion. It's to kind of manage expectations. And really, I think the onus is on the manager to help their direct reports create a career path. That's a real a commitment that a manager can make, meaning, okay, so, I'm hiring you as the marketing manager, and the potential next opportunity would be marketing director. Okay, so let's talk about the competencies, the skills. What do you need to demonstrate in order to be ready for that when and if it happens? Not a guarantee, but, how can we sort of position you? So, hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if it's ever fair, but a manager should be as transparent as possible in making sure that people know what the requirements are, and whoever meets those requirements are best suited for that promotion.
No, it definitely answers the question. It really comes down to the fairness has to start in the front end, setting those expectations. And this has been a truly engaging hour. I want to thank Michelle, Ted, and Carol for your time, your energy, your incredible usable insights. And I want to thank our audience for joining in today. The conversation does not have to end here. I really encourage you all to reach out to our panel for additional questions and thoughts on LinkedIn. Subscribe to the Careers Advance YouTube channel, and you can check out other content recordings, and connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We'll be offering a new free webinar every month, so keep an eye out and keep in touch. Because when we work together, everyone's mission is possible. Happy review season and happy holidays, everyone.